Contrast. Let me tell you a story what happened a few years ago when I was working in the German Research Center for AI. Quite a few people were Mac users, and it comes with a standard Keynote presentation template. And at that time, it was very common that you use gray tones because the simplistic design of gray tones was really nice. But they kind of put it to the max and even didn't never use fully black or fully white. And they used like a bit of a dark, kind of light, but a bit darker than the white gray as a background, like here in this image. And then they wrote the title there. And it was already a bit difficult and not so easy for the eye to see. And it looked still super nice on a high quality Mac monitor. But then they went to a presentation and they had a maybe low quality projector, or they had a screen which only supported 16 colors at that time. And then it looked a bit like that. Like if I would apply here the color correction and just make a bit of a higher brightness, or maybe even 40% brightness. And sometimes graphics were really invisible. Taking now white on black and having the same setting of brightness increased, we see nothing changed. White on black is always the highest possible contrast. Black on white the same, but why using black as a background, I discussed it already in other videos. So let's go back to the presentation, but it is really good to have the highest contrast possible so that if you do not the presentation screen and the setup way before, your presentation will still be very well readable and visible. Even with the LTU blue and white on in front of it, I had already encountered some problems in some setups where it was almost invisible, the white text, because the screen was extremely bright. So I'm using white foreground and black background. So that is our basic contrast guide, and we have already applied it on many slides and it looks already quite nice. But we can work even more with contrast. Seeing this slide, normally when I say my experience is in project acquisition, and then I would say I have done this and this and that, and then I will speak about the education. So instead of having these elements all three, people would naturally say, yeah, let them just appear one after the other. I'm not sure, I don't think it's possible like that because it's not as a text. So let me quickly make 3 items out of it without the annoying white lines, so that we really have each item under control. So away with you and away with education. As you know, just quickly remembering, we have 3 objects and we want to align them nicely. Centrally, we go to the home arrange. We said align them centrally, but we want to split them vertically, distribute vertically evenly, and now they have the same line spacing between, sorry again, the one object was too big. So I do again, arrange, distribute vertically, block, and now they have the same spacing, but we have a better control. So people would say, okay, let us just make an animation and let the one appear after the other, which would result in one item appearing one after the other. However, what's even nicer is, for illustration purposes, I may spread it now over 2 slides, is to dim the color, the moment, the item is not so important anymore. So we use typically shades of gray. We use just gray to dim it out the moment it appeared. And then we have education as the main focus. And finally, internationalization is the main focus. And we dim out education. So this is how the sequence looks like. There is another way how to deal with it. I will also show it in a minute. Maybe we do it directly in the agenda. We can also let all objects appear from the beginning. So we just gray it out, and then we copy it, and I copy the gray slide typically, and then we always make white that line which is currently in focus. So now the other achievements and the future vision. And now let's go through the slides. You see how I kind of control your eyes going exactly where I want them to be. And that is possible by just dimming out the rest. Now people say, yeah, but you know, I find highlighting things in gray, in red, much nicer. Let's try it out. We take here the slide. So we make everything gray and we want people to, no, we make everything white. And we now highlight something in red. Is it really that you look now as teaching experience first? In a way, it appears darker than everything else. And if you have a lot of things you want to highlight, people do that sometimes. They have a few words they want to highlight, maybe all that. And maybe, let's take the agenda fully out. Is now really Aria's teaching experience and future vision highlighted? Or is selected research and other achievements highlighted? I think it's more the one with a higher contrast. So when you want to highlight things, the best way to highlight is to have the highest contrast, white over gray. You want to use colors, go ahead, but still the brightest element should be the highlighted one. So do not use white and red, but maybe we could use dark gray. I think that one evens is already way better. Or we use just a way brighter red tone. I use now. The LTU scheme doesn't have so much of variety, but still now Arias is better highlighted than before. So we can really choose what to highlight. I personally prefer really using just white for highlighting. Here was nothing more to highlight, but there is later on in the later slides. Here we can a lot work with contrast. So this shift of having black background and white text and later having white background and black text is already a bad idea. You should look. I can probably change the colors. No, it's not in the standard scheme available. So we need to maybe not using smart arts, but I cannot unfortunately change this thing now here, as someone already decided to use smart arts. But I can select these elements here and just change the fill of these shapes to very dark. And of course, then the text needs to become very bright. And now we have already a way higher contrast. There's even the question, do we need these boxes at all? Wow. Was even worse before. Okay, I understand that. So what happens if I just make them black? And actually comes quite nicely readable. That one here I do not like too much. I think just reduce the size here a bit. Layout analysis, recognition, these are the elements. And we have already a way better contrast. Now we see here individually, why is there a need of all of these different colors? It just creates noise. And there is no semantic meaning in these colors. So if there is no semantic meaning, then do not introduce more different colors. Let's just choose one color. Can take a very dark gray, and the slide looks already much more professional. Of course, it doesn't look perfect. Maybe there are still too many elements in here. I can remove those as well. And I have a slide which is already way much more reduced and has a really clear contrast. Hopefully, one does not want to speak individually about these elements. If you want to do that, and I will do this maybe on a later slide. If you want to focus on something specific in a slide, let's say this graphics here where we cannot change anything, but we are not interested in all of these elements on the slide, but maybe just, let's say, on design development. So we can take our current image and we insert, I think I made it already, gave this idea in the past, we insert a box around it. Didn't work. Insert, shape, rectangle. Here we go. Yes. And we just cover everything else. Of course, we will not keep it like that. We make now the shape format, and instead of making it black and no border, which we had already before, we make the shape fill as with more gray fill colors, we can change the transparency. So we use black, but we make it 30% transparent. And if we do that, we have a very clear focus on what is the most important thing for us. Here it was the design development. And that we can apply this box. Once you have done it, you can put this box everywhere. For example, here you want to highlight, oh, look at the nice colors I use in the room. So you just copy the box a few times. And everything which is irrelevant, you just cover. And then the nice color or whatever you were interested in the specific picture will be highlighted. Of course, that was maybe not the best example. Maybe you want to do exactly the other thing and say, hey, look, this cool person there in the picture. Whatever you want to do. Or if you have this here and then I just copy now the image once. I keep the original. But if you now want to, in your presentation, say, now let's focus on all of the application areas in the area of classification, and just gray out everything else rather quickly. You can do that even use the same box to increase the contrast in graphics like architecture overview. Of course, this is not the main part of this presentation, but if you would have a presentation with a very complex architecture and you want people to focus on a specific aspect, let's say this one layer neural network part, we just insert again our graphics, and then there's a clear focus on this specific part in the image. And compare that, I will just copy it also to the other version, where we insert now a new shape. That's what people typically do. They put a rectangle around, make it transparent, and make a big outline, let's say in red. And let's make it a bit more thick. So this version here increases the noise level. It makes actually the whole picture less visible compared to that. This one here, very clear, the eyes will immediately go to the part where you want the audience to look at. I'll keep the slide here for your reference, but I will hide it so that you can see then the slide version, which is nicer. Now comes the most complicated one. Here in this graph, I would like that people have an eye on what's happening in Sweden, which would be this red curve here. That's a bit difficult because it's not just a box I can draw, but luckily in insert shapes, we can actually have a freeform shape where we click on the elements of where it's starting. So I make a freeform shape. The first one, I follow this red line here, going a bit down. I leave a bit of a margin. Go to Sweden, show Sweden in the table. And then I make the whole box around. This is now a shape. Of course, it's not really visible, this shape. Hopefully I can still select it. So I have here this shape now marked with a red outline, so that it's just easy to click. But I will not use the red outline. Instead, I will make the shape fill black, but with a 30% transparency, as we did already before. And now I will just remove also the outline. And then we have already a clear focus on the lower side of the graph. And then we insert a second shape, another freeform shape, where in this sense we are using, where I'm using the line, the freeform line, but then I use a fill color. So we make here a freeform line, following now everything else. And then with a shape format, and we fill it with black, but not exactly black, but the 30% transparency. And now the focus is clearly, we move it just a bit more up, on the development of this line in Sweden. That's a trick I do in order to just focus what's going on when we cannot adjust the graphics anymore. Right? Now I move it just a bit up and down, and there's a clear focus on the line in Sweden. It's of course not optimal. Optimal would be if we have access to the graphics itself and can really work on black background really bright for the one we're interested in, and everything else we just darken out. I realize, by the way, this shape is not perfect. I can, in the shape format, edit the shape, edit the points, and I can move that point here a bit up, that the United Kingdom is really not so nicely visible. And maybe I want to do the same also with this green here, which is still too much visible, so that there's more focus on the red. So use a freeform line and then change the background color. This makes it a shape. And then you can have whatever arbitrary form you have, you want to focus on. You highlight that by kind of darkening out the rest. It's called also mask in image processing. We add a mask on top of the whatever we have. What we can also do is, if we really want this line to be now perfectly visible, we insert a polygon line. So what we do before, freeform shape, but this time we make sure that the sorry, that the sorry. We will change then the color. So we just follow this graph, the red one, as it should be in the graphics. So and then we say shape outline red, make it maybe also a bit more thick, and can make everything else a bit black. And by that is a clear focus on the line of Sweden. We can even make a big version of this text Sweden so that it becomes really clearly visible.